If someone's listening to this and they're trying to figure out how to select a good IVF clinic, what are the things they should be looking for? Because I would have to assume that it's like any other field of medicine, right? Not all doctors and not all clinics are created equal. And just because you see a lot of advertising doesn't tell you anything, right? So in other words, you're going to have to become a very, very intelligent consumer. For most people, this will be the single most expensive out-of-pocket healthcare expense they have.
Yeah, that's true.
And so it's not just that it's the most expensive healthcare decision they're ever going to make. It might be one of the most consequential as well.
For sure.
And yet I know what I suggest to people when someone says, Peter, my wife and I are thinking about getting IVF. What do you think? I just go down the rabbit hole of like, here's 100 questions I would ask.
Yeah.
And it usually begins with, tell me your success rate individually. I don't care about the national success rate. It means nothing to me. So how would you counsel someone who's trying to come up with their checklist of questions to ask?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, these days is a little bit easier because obviously there's the internet and there's suggested questions online you could look at. It's true there is some variability amongst clinics, although there's a lot of consolidation happening in the field as well. So a lot of the practices are becoming common to most clinics. But some of it is practical, right? Like which clinics are close to where you live? Because
you have to go in and get these ultrasounds.
You got to go in every few days. So you can't be going to another state. Most people can't.
But in most major cities, you have multiple options.
In most major cities, that's true. Yeah. So you're right about individual clinic success rates, although technically it's hard to use those to compare them to each other because you don't necessarily know the patient population, right?
So how do you normalize it to?
Right. So one thing for sure, look at the success rates. And we're one of the few fields of medicine where actually you can get clinic-specific success rates. So
you mean publicly it's available?
Yeah, it's available. Yeah. So
where do you find it?
Well, the CDC, until recently, there is a law actually that says you have to report every IVF cycle and the success rate. That was passed in the 90s. So because of that, the CDC tracks this, although all the people that work in that department were fired recently. So we don't know what's going to happen with that. But also our professional organizations called Society of Assisted Reproductive Technology has a website. It's called SART.org is the URL. And all the clinics in the U.S., or most of them, are on there. And they have to report their success rates, and they're published every year. There's usually like a 2-year lag because the babies have to be born and everything. So I would send people to that website first, look at the clinics in your area, look at the success rates, keeping in mind, right, that populations might be different in different clinics. I probably would go to a clinic that does a sufficient volume. You have to do at least 100 cycles, I would say, but ideally more than that.
Your clinic has how many doctors?
Our clinic has about 6 doctors.
And how many total cycles do you guys do a year?
We do like 600 to 800 retrievals a year. There's a lot of variability. There's some clinics that do thousands. There's some that do like 50. So that would be one factor that I think is important, just volume.
And you have how many embryologists?
We have something like 9 embryologists.
Wow.
Yeah, there is a shortage of embryologists, nationwide, and reproductive endocrinologists because the demand for IVF is going up, right? So I would definitely look at the clinic success rates, look at the volume. The other thing, with the internet especially, you can look at patient reviews, word of mouth, and got to take those with a grain of salt, right?
Yeah, they tend to be negative selecting.
Right.
So.
Not everybody who has a great experience is necessarily going to post it on Reddit.
But everyone who has a bad one does.
Yeah. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. But there are objective ways. And you can also interview your doctor.
Yeah, what are questions you should be asking of the doctor that are independent of the objective metrics that we might have just discussed?
You can ask about their sort of philosophy, about protocols, about things like add-ons, like genetic testing, for example, is like, are you a clinic where everybody is encouraged to do a genetic testing? That's not necessarily the clinic I would choose, right? You talk to the patient about the pros and cons, and you let the patient decide. And we do a lot of genetic testing, so it's not like I'm against it or anything. But, you want to get a sense of the vibe of the clinic. Are they just, interested in money? Not that doctors ever think like that, but you know what I mean? So sometimes it takes having a consultation with one or more clinics to see where you feel more comfortable. I'm a little bit biased towards some academic centers just because our missions include like education and research, et cetera. But there's several very excellent private clinics as well.
What would be some red flags if you're going through this process? And by the way, do you have how much of a delta is there in cost within a same city, or do prices tend to converge within a given geography?
Yeah, within a given geography, they're pretty similar, and it's not cheap.
Yeah, so
right.
What are we at today, fully loaded cost?
An IVF cycle is probably around $20,000 per cycle.
But that doesn't include genetic testing, or does?
Including genetic testing,
okay.
Per cycle.
But how does that compare to 20 years ago? Is that more or less? Inflation?
Prices, like most things, have gone up.
It has?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess it should go up just based on the cost of labor that goes into all these things.
Yeah, and there's,
even though the genetic testing's coming down.
Yeah, innovations and things like you're right. Like you think as volume goes up, eventually prices go down, but that hasn't quite happened. As new things get added, then it just tends to become more expensive.
And most people are probably still paying out of pocket. Most people are not getting this covered by insurance.
Again, depends where you live.
Yeah, but across
states,
the country.
Yeah, and I think there are 24 states that offer some kind of fertility coverage. About 15 of them include IVF. So you're right. Most places they're paying out of pocket if your employer doesn't happen to offer infertility insurance coverage. Yeah. So red flags, again, the communication with the clinic. So a lot of your experience is going to be communicating with nurses and,
just setting up appointments.
Coordinators. Yeah. So you want to get a sense of what that is like, because that could be stressful if it's not smooth. And oftentimes, our clinic included, sometimes it's not smooth. I mean, there've been, some things we try and do like texting and apps and things to make the communication, easier, and but it doesn't always work the way it's supposed to, kind of thing. And you want to get time with your doctor. So some clinics, you hardly ever see the doctor, and you see maybe the ultrasonographer. Not that that's bad, but it's kind of nice. Some patients prefer to have that sort of more frequent interaction with their actual
So there's probably
provider.
a sweet spot in volume where it's probably an inverted U shape, where if they're too low, they don't have the reps. If they're too high, it's a bit of a sweatshop and a factory, and you want in the middle there. I'm Peter Attia. This podcast relies exclusively on premium subscribers for support, which allows us to provide all our content without taking a single penny from advertisers. I believe this keeps my content honest, making it a trusted resource for listeners like you. As a premium member, you'll get immediate access to our entire back catalog of AMA episodes and all future AMA episodes. You'll get longevity-focused premium articles packed with actionable insights. You'll get unrivaled show notes for each and every episode of The Drive, every topic, every study, every resource from each episode carefully curated for you. You'll get quarterly podcast summaries where you'll learn my biggest personal takeaways from the previous 90 days of expert guest episodes, and much more. This journey doesn't have to be navigated alone. We can take these steps towards a better, longer life together. Become a premium member today at peterattiamd.com/subscribe to join me in a shared commitment to a healthier future.